South Africa's housing backlog is sitting at an estimated 2.3 million dwellings that are required right now. New Minister of Human Settlements, Lindiwe Sisulu, is optimistic that government is up to the challenge of building 1.5 million houses in the next 5 years.
Yeah. So what would have been put in place in 2009 would only have matured in 2010. So the slump starts from 2010 until last year. Last year we only produced about 134,000. When in 2012 we produced, in 2009 we produced some 8 and 9. We produced something like 270,000.
Wow.
So when we produced that, we knew it was possible, and we had thought, well, we will keep at this, because part of what we were doing at that time was bringing in a new policy, testing its efficacy, testing its possibility to fast track. So when we reached that level, we thought, this is our plateau, it's been done, it is possible, and we will continue at that level. We also did understand that we had not gone far enough in creating the legal instruments for the policy we had put in place in 2004. So up to now, there is no legal policy. I mean, there is no legislation that is based on the policy that we approved and we're rolling out up until 2009. I would think that would have been our biggest mistake. If we'd had legislation by then, everything else would have been bound by legislation. But it was ongoing pilots. So for instance, N2 was a pilot on how to do things on a large scale, how to do it in an integrated fashion, how to do it with all 3 spheres of government involved, all of these things that we have in the comprehensive plan. But we hadn't got to the point of actually putting it into legislation.
What would that legislation, and then I would assume then that you're planning to bring forth such legislation, what would it cover?
What it would cover, well, first of all, before you have legislation, you have what is called a green paper. You put it out to the public, green as it is, and the public feeds in, and normally the feedback from the public is quite lively, because there isn't anybody who's not affected by a human settlement in one way or another. Then we provide the white paper, and thereafter we have the legislation. Now, the legislation would have the elements of what is in the NDP policy document right now, which also is what we had in the policy of the breaking new ground. It would determine the standards. It would determine the size of what is it, what do we mean by a house, a free house that government gives. That we'd already worked out in breaking new ground as a 40 square meter house, which would have 2 bedrooms, so that there's privacy, 1 kitchen and a lounge. That would be the most basic unit, in the hope that when the circumstances of the family improve, then they can either enlarge it or do whatever variations. But it would be a basic house that we feel that the state can afford to give within whatever resources we have. That is determined in our policy. It also determines who is responsible for what. For instance, what is the role of municipalities, what is the role of local government, what a metro, what's the role of province, and what is the role of national government in all of this value chain. It determines the quality of the work. We put up we do have an entity called the NHBRC, which is a National Home Registration Council, whose job it is to make sure that the quality of housing, from the first layer to the last, and gives a a kind of go ahead for this. The house may now be given over to an owner. So all of these things are worked out in the policy and how it should operate and all of those things. And we would turn that into legislation which makes it enforceable. Because the law, I mean, what we had intended, which would be in the law, would be we provide housing, free housing for indigent people. It's not for everybody, it's for the indigent. And the term indigent is actually spelled out and defined in the social development, initial social development act, because we spent a lot of time trying to work out who do we define as indigent, and we have got a working definition, and that's a working definition we're going to borrow to put into the new legislation that we're going to put in place, so that it is a very specific group of people who are otherwise unable to provide housing for themselves, and the state would be required to step in.
So do you, is there a time period when you would see the phasing out of free housing, or because it's a moving target? I mean, people are becoming indigent all the time, so it's a figure that would never stay stable, surely.
Our intention is not to reproduce indigency. Our intention is to create opportunities for people, grow jobs so that people have a job, so that people become independent, so that people become owners of their own property. So we're not working to go backwards. Our intention is to provide the opportunities so we can have a prosperous South Africa. So that is how we are looking at going forward, which is why we are being optimistic in saying that we will reach a cut-off point once we've cleared the backlog. And hopefully by that time people will have some form of housing. But we are putting a lot of stress, I must say, right now on social housing and rental housing, because what it does do is allow people to have access to housing, and at the same affordable housing, and at the same time be responsible for making sure that they do provide roof over their children. I think it's a basic responsibility that every parent would like to have. The fact that we have a history that we're trying to make up for is something we're hoping we will put an end to at some point. We unfortunately have the history we have, where a whole lot of the people who are now in our urban centers were dispossessed of their land, where they're seeking opportunities because there are very little opportunities wherever they might be, and we have a responsibility as a state to provide some form of shelter for those people, and that is why it is in the Constitution.